Have you ever looked at your stock portfolio and thought that it could use a little bit more fascism? Probably not a good move these days, what with the benefit of hindsight and all that. But for a brief moment in history, betting it all on old Adolf was a very profitable gamble, as long as you figured out a way to keep your riches after it all came crashing down. Now, to be clear, in the early 1930s, very few people were left that were still invested in Germany's stock market. After all, Germany had lost the First World War, and then had to endure massive reparations payments to the Entente, a hyperinflation crisis, and a banking crisis. The summer of 1932 marked the absolute bottom of the Great Depression for Germany. Anyone holding stocks had been effectively obliterated. Worse yet, the country seemed on the verge of civil war, with Nazi brown shirts and communist paramilitaries clashing in the streets, and the German Reichstag paralyzed between the radical left and far-right parties. Not exactly what you'd call a bullish signal. By this point, only the ultra-wealthy industrialists and a few Americans you might be familiar with still held out, and they were all definitely not rooting for the communists. When Hitler took power in January 1933, the German stock market was elated, and it began a dramatic upswing over the next 5 years, doubling in value. A better way for you to make money in your free time is by using the app of our dear friends, FreeCash. Their app lets you earn money by playing mobile games and completing offers, like little side quests if you will, and if you sign up through our link, you will get a $10 bonus. FreeCash is, as the name suggests, entirely free and has 4.7 stars on Trustpilot with over 280,000 reviews. You sign up through the link in the description, enable tracking, and go to the Earn tab, where you can pick any offer to complete. You earn rewards as soon as you complete an offer, and you can conveniently cash out through PayPal. A fun little game I played is Puzzles and Chaos, a puzzle game where you match colors to deal damage to your enemies. Once I had vanquished them, I claimed my reward directly in PayPal, a worthy prize for such noble work. And as a special courtesy to SideQuest viewers, you'll receive a $10 bonus. Just register using the link in the description. Sign up for FreeCash and enjoy earning free money with ease that the Germans could only have dreamed of. It is worth noting that the gains were concentrated in firms connected to the Nazi Party. Depending on how you count, no less than 1 in 7 public companies were in bed with Adolf by 1933, and perhaps as many as a full half. Certainly, many industrialists and aristocrats underestimated how out of control the Nazis would get. This includes Franz von Papen, the man who quite deliberately bestowed Hitler with absolute power under the childish delusion that he could then be controlled. Within mere months, Hitler had stamped out all opposing political parties and had issued his first decrees against the Jews. Bad news if you're a good person, but great news for the stock market. With political instability finally solved, German stocks did have a good reason to go up, and the Nazis would soon give them plenty more. The man all Nazi investors had to thank for their years of outperformance was Hjalmar Schacht, a conservative banker personally appointed by Hitler to lead the Reichsbank. While never a member of the Nazi Party himself, Schacht nevertheless was instrumental in most of its pre-war economic shenanigans. He oversaw the vast public works of the Nazi state, including the construction of the Autobahns, which directly reduced unemployment and brought Germany out of the Great Depression. Simultaneously, Schacht brought foreign trade and currency exchange under the state's control, specifically to assist Hitler's plans for rearmament. Yet, perhaps Schacht's most brilliant contribution was the financial wizardry he concocted to hide the fact that Nazi rearmament was even taking place. The infamous Mifo bills allowed Schacht's Reichsbank to lend billions of Reichsmarks for rearmament under everyone's nose, as much as 50% of all weapons purchases. To be clear, this was all leveraged debt that had to one day be paid back, essentially a Ponzi scheme, so it was in no way sustainable. But overnight, German industry went from depression-level stagnation to a state-backed demand boom, so everyone was happy. And as if that wasn't enough, Hitler gave German companies a further boost by banning all trade unions and instituting wage freezes. So, at the same time that demand was surging, labour expenses remained fixed, resulting in a spectacular boom of corporate profits. Of course, it was all built on a house of cards that would inevitably crumble if the Nazi economy did not go to war. But the stock market didn't know that, so it kept pumping. The summer of 1937 was the peak of this pre-war stock market euphoria, when everything seemed to go right for the Nazi economy. Someone who had bought in 1932 would be up over 150% in 5 years. It was also still relatively easy to cash out and move your money elsewhere, provided you paid the Reich's modest 25% exit fee. Unless, of course, you happened to be Jewish, in which case you would have lost your German citizenship in 1935 and would be lucky to escape with a fraction of your wealth. Things started to turn sour in 1938 after Hitler annexed Austria and threatened to invade Czechoslovakia. Potential war against France and Britain kept investors on edge, as everyone feared that Hitler might drag Germany into a war. While nobody went to war to save Czechoslovakia, the Nazi stock market remained flat for another full year. When Hitler invaded Poland, everyone held their breath as Britain and France finally declared war on Germany. Yet Poland was crushed by the Germans in less than a month, with help from Hitler's favourite frenemy, Joseph Stalin. When it became clear that Britain and France would just hide behind the Maginot Line, twiddling their thumbs, the Nazi stock market exploded upwards faster than a hand at a Nuremberg rally. The conquests of Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands pushed the Nazi stock market to new highs. And by the time France fell after 6 short weeks of half-hearted fighting, the Nazi investor could happily look at their portfolio having tripled in value from the Depression lows. Nazi stocks had beaten not just the S&P, but half of Europe. Now, towards the end of 1940, it was still plausible for you to sell your Nazi stocks and move your gains to a conveniently neutral country like Switzerland. Yet cashing out was becoming increasingly difficult. The Nazis were closing all the loopholes to keep investors locked into the Nazi financial system and the war effort. The Nazis were never fans of freedom, especially for capital markets. So even though stocks were rising, people's ability to enjoy those gains was shrinking. If one didn't have strong connections in the Nazi Party, the winter of 1940 and early 1941 was probably the last real opportunity to liquidate your gains and run off to greener pastures. But Nazi investors were not immune to the fear of missing out, so most kept their money in the market. At first, their greed paid off. When Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, he dealt terrible blows to the Russians, destroying armies with millions of soldiers in the first months of the war. Like the Blitzkrieg in the West, the Nazi stock market reacted by shooting up euphorically. Yet before long, the Berlin Stock Exchange realized something that it took most Nazis, and the rest of the world, at least another year to grasp. The war with the Soviet Union had fundamentally failed. It would not be the quick plundering that all of Hitler's previous conquests had been. The Nazi stock market peaked in the autumn of 1941, nearly at the peak of Germany's territorial expansion into the Soviet Union. While the Wehrmacht's patrols were in sight of Moscow's spires, the Nazi stock market foresaw that the momentum had shifted. The Soviet Union did not crumble, and now the Nazis were at war with Britain, the Soviets, and in short order, the US. By this point, your hypothetical Nazi portfolio was looking less like a store of wealth and more like a hostage note. From 1942 onwards, investors could only sell their stocks to the Reich, and not for cash, but for government bonds. So in practice, almost everyone was trapped. Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels was working overtime to convince the Germans that this was fine. But the defeat at Stalingrad shattered any such illusions. For any investor paying attention, the question was no longer about beating the market, but about getting out with more than the clothes on your back. After Stalingrad, the Berlin Stock Exchange froze its prices, and in August 1944, the market was closed indefinitely. By the time the Soviets were knocking on the gates of Berlin, Nazi Germany had no financial system to speak of, and Reichsmarks were abandoned as a currency in favor of cigarettes and Hershey's bars. Whatever fortune you might have built riding the Nazi wave was now trapped in a country occupied by 4 different armies. If your stocks were in companies in the Soviet zone, they now belonged to the proletariat and were worth exactly 0. But if you were lucky enough to be in West Germany, you had some chance of recovering assets, provided you weren't a convicted Nazi war criminal. Actually, you'd be surprised at how many Nazis were let off the hook at the end of the war, but that's a story for another time. When the West German Stock Exchange finally reopened in 1948, stocks of surviving companies opened trading at prices about 90% lower than the high of 1941. The only consolation for you would be that if you'd continue to hold West German stocks, you'd make back all your money and a ton more, thanks to the so-called Wirtschaftswunder. West German stocks would boom from the 1950s onwards, in no small part thanks to aid from the US. The companies that once built the Nazi war machine quietly rebranded, and their shareholders did very well. A fact they'd prefer you not dwell too much on. What you should dwell on is liking and subscribing to our humble little channel. It's free, unlike leaving the Third Reich. If you enjoyed this brief tour through history's least moral market, consider supporting us on Patreon. Also consider checking out our first ever merch, the Stars and Stripes pin set, linked in the description. Let us know in the comments what other topics you'd like us to cover, and stay tuned for the next dubiously profitable episode of SideQuest. Why did Hitler never ride cabs? He was more of a Ubermensch.